Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more. If you're not in love with your buyers, and if you don't take seriously the incredibly deep understanding of the buyers that you need to have, both as a business entity and as human beings, you're going to miss out on millions of dollars worth of business equity. I'm your host, Sarah Hicks, and today on the Predictable Revenue Podcast, I'm going to be chatting with an expert about helping founders establish the right sales infrastructure for growth. For over 20 years, he has been obsessed with how and why people make decisions. His journey started when he graduated in neuroscience, learning about the brain structure and discovering the impact this has on the psychology of sales and decision-making. And then fast forward several years, and he has won various sales awards, led sales teams for well-known brands, and specialized in selling solutions to C-level executives across 4 continents. He founded Proverbial Door because he was frustrated by the current advice on training and on sales persuasion. Moeed Amin, welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be on the show, and what a great introduction. Thank you for that, Sarah.
Thank you. So excited to have you. Give us a bit of context, Moeed. What do you mean by kind of infrastructure in this context?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the infrastructure is really the setting around which the sales itself, but more important, the salespeople perform in their roles. And most people talk about things like, training and skills and hiring the right people. You bring the right people into the company and they will help grow your business, right? They will help bring in more sales. And nothing can be further from the truth, because you're really looking at things in the wrong way. Firstly, you don't know if that salesperson, for example, could be a high performer in another company, but they may not have the right qualities and skills for what you need to do in your business in relation to the customers and the buyers you're dealing with. What are the incentives that you have that are encouraging the right behaviors? What information do you have on your buyers? What are the goals? Are you looking for someone that's in account management versus growing the business through new customer acquisition, right? What is the coaching structure around that? That is what I mean by, do you even have partnership programs, for example, right? That is what I mean by infrastructure. It starts all the way from understanding your buyer and then creating a strategy, all the way down to who are you hiring? How are you onboarding them? How are you coaching and training them? How are you managing them to get the best out of them as well? And that whole thing is the infrastructure by which your salespeople and your sales team sit within in order for them to achieve. Think of it as the scaffolding. If you don't have the right scaffolding, then you don't have the right support for your salespeople to shine and to deliver on their promises.
And tell me a little bit more about the common mistakes that you see founders make when they're kind of getting started, starting to try to scale, try to grow. What are the mistakes that they make here?
Yeah, there are quite a few. The first one is, believe it or not, they hire a chief revenue officer. And hiring a chief revenue officer does not mean that you're going to scale your sales. And there are several reasons for that. Sales is still a very misunderstood profession. And especially right now, where there's a plethora of founders who come from a technical background or subject matter background. They don't know or understand sales or commercialization in a very good way. So either they don't know it at all, or they have a very warped view of what good sales looks like. And the first thing they do is they hire a chief revenue officer. Now, for the reasons I talked about earlier, that person may come with a great track record, but has that person come from a very big corporate business and they don't really understand what it takes to grow a small company from a Series A into a Series B, C, D, E, etc.? Do they have those qualities, right? So that's the first thing. Secondly, have they got the level of experience that you need in terms of training and coaching and hiring the right staff? Will they inject some of the right things that you need to know? For example, one of the big things you've got to know about is understanding your buyers, right? Being buyer obsessed, which I'll come on to later on. If they don't have the expertise and the knowledge in order to uncover that information and go about doing so, they're probably not the right people. So that's the first mistake that they make, is they hire a chief revenue officer that has a great track record, but is it great for them? The second mistake that they make is that they don't take the time to understand what good sales looks like. So what will happen is they will hire the chief revenue officer. They will ask them to, grow the business, grow sales, but they will leave them to it. And you cannot leverage what you don't know. So they don't understand whether the decisions that chief revenue officer is making, are they the right decisions? And secondly, they don't know enough about sales in order to hold them accountable. So are they checking with them, when they check with them every month or every week, whatever the cadence is with their chief revenue officer, are they just blindly following what they're saying, or do they know how to pressure test some of those decisions that they're making? Do they understand enough about the metrics that underpin those decisions to know if the pacing has slightly gone off, for example? And can they hold that chief revenue officer accountable? And the third main mistake that they make is that we talked about the infrastructure. So I'll go a little bit further than that, which is they have no clue or very little understanding about their buyer community. They don't know who their ideal customer profile is and what makes them an ideal customer. And usually, even if they do that, it's really a very, very surface level understanding, which is all about the company, not much about the human behind that, right? The person that's making the real decisions. They don't know the buyer's journey in any way, right? They don't know where they educate themselves about solutions like yours, about decisions that they're making related to what you offer. They don't know who commands their attention. They don't know who influences them. They don't know where they're going to learn those things. They don't know who's involved in the buyer's process. There's so much there about the customer experience and the customer's environment and lives that they don't understand. And then they bring in a chief revenue officer, or they try to create a sales team, again, with no understanding of that. And really, they're trying to, as one of my mentors says, they're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It just doesn't work. So those are some of the, and the other one that's incredibly important is they get this injection of money and they hire, shove them out into the market, sell, and they wonder why A, they're not getting as many sales as they would like, B, it's costing them a ton of money. So the cost of customer acquisition is skyrocketing. C, they don't understand why their retention levels are so low, right? And really, it's because they're not looking about growing the business. They're just looking about making more sales at any cost, which is a hugely damaging approach. So I'd say those are kind of the four main mistakes that are really damaging that I see founders doing.
Thank you. So knowing that those are the kind of misconceptions and the mistakes that are commonly being made, what is the first good, real step that founders should be taking to start to build this infrastructure for growth?
Yeah, the first real thing is just really to become buyer obsessed, to really understand the perspective of the buyer, and start with who are your ideal customers going to be. And there's a lot of talk around that, but from the companies that I've talked to, and I've over the years observed, probably into the thousands now, actually, I'll probably say less than 1% really understand their customers and really understand who the ideal customer is. And it's not, like I said, it's not the surface level, which is just about the types of companies. For example, $1 billion company revenue, they have this many markets or this many offices. No, it's about the individuals as well, who are the buyers themselves. Here's a really simple example, Sarah, that I ask, and I've probably had, out of the hundreds that I've asked in terms of salespeople, and out of the 418 buyers so far that I've asked about, if I was to ask a salesperson, tell me about the MBOs or the KPIs of your typical buyer. How are they being measured? What will determine their bonus? What are their responsibilities in terms of their performance reviews, whatever it might be? I've probably had no more than one hand out of the hundreds be able to answer that confidently? Well, look, if you don't know, and this includes founders, by the way, if you don't know how your buyers are measured in terms of bonuses, promotions, things they care about, how could you possibly know what's going to motivate them? How can you possibly align what you do with what will motivate them? So understanding the world of your buyers is incredibly important. And here's why that's really important as well, is your position in the market is going to be different from those of your competitors. I would hope you're not trying to do the same as them. So the way you touch the buyers and affect their world has to be different. And that will go beyond just your go-to-market strategy. That's your product, that's your customer service, that's your tech, whatever it might be. It's all geared towards how do we give more value to those buyers? How do we make those buyers look like heroes? Because at the end of the day, it's not about ROI. It is important, don't get me wrong. Business value, ROI, that is important. But a buyer will buy from you for one main reason. And that reason is, can I entrust my reputation in this person's hands? Because when I make this decision, if it goes wrong, my reputation's at stake. In fact, I may even lose my job, right? Or my ego is at stake. So can I entrust my reputation in this person's hands? Is it safe in this person's hands? So understanding your buyers is the first port of call for any founder if you're looking to grow and scale your business in terms of the go-to-market approach.
That's a great point about the MBOs and the KPIs. And yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think it's something that so many are overlooking. We think we know what they care about by looking at like the LinkedIn job description, by asking the people within our company, like, what do you do in your day to day? And it kind of stops there. It doesn't. And then we try to align with their goals and their motivations based on what we've assumed from those sources. But you need to actually go in and dig and figure out exactly what they're comped on, what their goals are, what their targets are, and what they're measured on. Absolutely. That makes sense. And once you've got clarity on this, so you've got your ideal customer profile, but you've gone those layers deeper to really understand the buyer and then the humans that they are, what's the next step in building the infrastructure?
The next step is the extension to that, which is the customer buying journey. And it's a lot wider than people think it is. When you use the example of, let's think about an example. Let's say you're buying a CRM. Is that the right example? Let's use an everyday example, actually. Let's say you are thinking about eating at a restaurant, right? Now, the buyer's journey doesn't start necessarily with that initial point when you think about, I'm going to eat out today, right? This is just an example. Most people think that's where the buyer's journey starts, but actually it's way before that, right? It's, where am I hearing about restaurants, for example? Is it a particular community of friends that I have? Is it a magazine that I subscribe to about restaurants, about food, about culinary interests? Is it, the buyer experience could be, you know what? I ate Thai food when I was young and didn't agree with me. I was 5 years old. And ever since then, I just don't like Thai food. That is, believe it or not, part of the buyer's experience. So the buyer's experience is really, really wide. And what you need to understand is, what do those buyers go through? Not within the prism of sales, although that is the first level of maturity. But as you further advance into the maturity level, you will start to appreciate that the buyer's journey is far wider than that, and it's within their own perspective. And so why is that important? Well, because at every point of that buyer's journey, someone is influencing them. And the decision you've got to make is, do we have a seat at that influencing table or not? And that, where attention flows, energy and decision goes, right? And so you need to understand who's commanding that person's attention at what stage. And more importantly, where are they in that buyer's journey? What are the triggers that will tell me that person's in that stage of the journey? And therefore, what is my approach with them? If I'm in sell mode, but they're in education phase, well, in the education phase, they're taking their time. They don't want to be pressured. They're exploring opportunities. They're investigating. They're researching. So although it feels like a longer game that sales leaders and investors don't like to hear, the worst thing you can do is go sell. particularly with the more informed buyer at these day and age. So you need to understand where they are in the journey, because you need to understand what information is going to be of value for them, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got someone education phase, fine. But what if you've got someone who's in the stakeholder validation phase? What if you've got someone who's at the stage right now, they know that they need to make a decision about a new CRM tool or a new software tool of some kind. They know it, but now they've got to convince other people in the business that this is the right idea. And that can be incredibly challenging. So would selling them be of value, or would giving them information so that they can have better discussions internally to convince those stakeholders and make them look smarter and more valuable and more interested by the stakeholders, would that be of more value than selling to them? Because if you can do that and help them do that, guess what? Who are they going to call on when they decide to look at vendors? Is it going to be the people that just sold to them and just annoyed them? Or is it going to be those friends that helped them, right? Mm-hmm. So knowing that buyer's journey is incredibly important, because that will create the elements of the infrastructure, both in sales and marketing, leading with insights, even the skills of the people that you acquire. That will inform those decisions and how you structure your go-to-market functions around that.
Mm-hmm. And whose job is it, do you think, within the company to map that out, find those triggers that exist within your market, all those things? Whose job is it to build out this buyer's journey?
It's a good question. Everyone has a contribution to that. In the earlier stages of the business, I would argue it's everyone, because you're trying to build a complete picture. The founder may have sources of people or information that they can access. The salespeople may... Sales and marketing, for sure, are going to be the biggest ingesters of that information, because they're at the sharp end where your company meets the market, no doubt. However, other people in the business will have a contribution to that and different perspective. If you have a consulting team, they will have insights, right? And they will have contacts that they can get information from. The product team, believe it or not, when they have engagements with the users and they're talking about the product, its functionalities and improvements and understanding why, they can also contribute to this, because they can start asking those really valuable questions of the users to say, well, you're asking about this functionality. Why is that important for you? Where are you hearing that that is a valuable thing for you? Is that coming from you, or is it coming from someone else, right? So they can be a part of that, as well as the founders. So in my view, it's everyone's job. However, ownership should be with the commercial function. When I say commercial function, I mean sales and marketing. It should be, and customer success, of course, it should be with them. They should be the people who are championing and holding other parts of the business accountable to asking those questions, collating that information, and analyzing that information to then inform their decisions. So yeah, it should be everyone's involvement, but yeah, I would probably say commercial's responsibility, just because the sheer volume and frequency by which they have those interactions.
Sure. Okay, so we've got our buyer's journey mapped. We really understand that it's wider than we thought it was. It doesn't start with just the click the request a demo button or attend a webinar or something like that. What do we do next?
Yeah. So next, now you can form the strategy, right? Now you can form the strategy of what do you want your commercial function to look like? And that will be in the form of, let's give an example. You've understood who your customers are. You've understood the buyer's journey, right? So the question now is, okay, what channels or leverages of communication are we going to use to connect with them? Will they respond to SDRs, or will they respond to the more experienced salesperson that can do both? Who are the types of individual? What traits are we looking for in those salespeople, right? And I talk about traits more than skills, because we could say, we're going after these types of customers. We're going to be up against these competitors. This is going to be our differentiator. There's going to be a lot of, patience required in dealing with these customers, because we're kind of the new kid on the block here. That means we're going to need someone that's a bit more patient, right? So someone that comes from a hard and fast sales background may not be the qualities that we're looking for. It doesn't mean that they're not good. It's just not going to be right for us. So the next stage really is about the strategy, and strategy is really things like, okay, who are we going to go after now, and how? who and what are the people that we need to hire, and what skill sets and traits do we need to hire in that will be a right fit for that approach? Do we need to have local salespeople that speak the language, understand the culture, or could we have a more regional or centralized sales structure? And the other thing that we need to look at are the rewards and the incentives, because most people just go down the route of commission-based incentives, et cetera, right? If you're an early stage business, well, you want to give 10 or 15% of the sales rather than, say, a mature business that will have a more bucket type approach to remuneration. But what if you have a sales cycle that's 12 or 18 months? Hiring salespeople with a slightly lower base pay, but an elevated commission package may not be the right thing, actually, because it takes patience. It takes planning in order to kind of get that first sale, especially if it's a 12 or 18-month sales cycle. So that may not be the right approach for us. So you would probably look at all those elements of the strategy, right? Who do we need? So firstly, what is the strategy, right? Who do we go after, et cetera? Where do we place our people? Who are the right types of people? What are the skills that they need to have? And then what are the behaviors that we want to encourage? And how will that manifest in the form of the rewards, incentive, remuneration, whatever you want to call it, that we want to give them? How much of that is going to be monetary versus non-monetary incentives? Because the traits of the people that we hire and the skills that we want to develop, are they going to be more motivated by money? Or are they going to be more motivated by balance between money and, say, non-monetary incentives like trading, for example, right? Attending trade shows, things that, whatever it is of interest to them. So there's a whole raft of things. And then the other final thing is the partnerships. And that's a whole topic on its own. But, partnerships are very underutilized, but a very powerful source of sales growth. And what you need to ask yourself is, well, when we understand the customer buying journey, if they're being heavily educated by certain vendors, and back in the 90s, that used to be the case. It's less so now. But if you find out that actually that's still the case for a lot of our buyers, well, then could we work with those vendors as a go-to-market approach? And let's take the example of an FMCG company, right? You might be selling there's a client of mine that provides TPM solutions, so revenue management solutions to FMCG companies. One source of channel might be, well, who do these companies rely on to do business? Well, they rely on, packaging businesses, companies like Tetra Pak, for example. They rely on ingredients-based businesses or molecule-based businesses like Ingredion or Givaudan or things like that to actually create the formulas for their products. So since they have a good relationship with those companies, could we build a relationship with those suppliers, which in turn creates a referral for us? So there are infrastructural elements as well as swim lanes or channels or levers, whatever you want to call them, that will then impact how you do that. So the what, the why, the who, the when, the how, those things are the things that you look at. And I gave quite a few of those examples. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense what I just shared?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And one more piece you mentioned early on in kind of the key mistakes that a lot of founders make, it's hiring that CRO too early and not hiring the right person. So once you've got this strategy and you understand the types of salespeople you need for the journey for the buyer, how do you make your first decision about the first sales leader that you bring on to kind of take that off of your plate?
Yeah. The traits that I talked about are the traits you're going to look for in that sales leader. So if you need someone that's going to help you develop the messaging so that your brand has a seat at that table, and you're being heard, right? So there's a company right now that I worked with that does IP, basically helps collect IP of things, intellectual property around the world, helps companies be able to search for that IP, right, all over the world. So if they have a technology they want to IP, what is it out there at the moment? Now they're up against a company that's just been valued at $1 billion. It's a unicorn, right? So the question is, that's a crowded market. There's a big player in there. How can we have our voice heard? So again, you're going to be looking for a chief revenue officer that understands the value of that has experience in doing so, and has some ideas about how you can get your voice heard. You're going to you might have certain behaviors that you want to encourage. For example, continuous learning or trial and error, right? You don't want a chief revenue officer that's going to punish people for making mistakes. That may not be right. You might want to punish them. I don't know, not punish is a strong word, but you might not want them to make those mistakes more than once. But you certainly don't want to discourage people from making mistakes, because that's part of the learning process. We're innovating here. That's a core part of innovation. So are those the traits that we want to see in our chief revenue officer? Someone that's able to encourage that. We believe in coaching, something that I think any company should believe in. So do we have a CRO that has a track record and believes in the value of coaching, right? So, those are the traits. So whatever it is that you want to see in your salespeople and in your marketing approach and your customer success approach, you need to make sure that you're hiring a CEO that exemplifies and aligns to those values, and in fact has some great ideas about how to develop and encourage those very skills and attitudes in the team that they have. You want to have someone that's going to be able to, in the hiring process, look for those types of traits, because they see the value of those things as well. So that's my biggest advice when it comes to choosing the right CRO. The other thing is, believe it or not, you want a CRO that's going to challenge your view of things. The worst thing you can do is hire a CEO that's just going to be a yes person, right? That's just going to basically follow what you want. Because let's face it, you're hopefully hiring the CRO not just because you need someone to take on those responsibilities, but because they're going to improve on what you've done. So if you're going to just choose someone that's going to do what you want them to do, then unfortunately your business is going to miss out on a lot of growth, or you could be exposing your business to a lot of harm. So I would hope you're also hiring a CRO that's not afraid to stand up to your views if they disagree with it, obviously in a professional and constructive way, but someone who's going to challenge your way of thinking, someone who's going to come with some great ideas for how you need to grow and improve your go-to-market strategy. So I'd say those are the kind of two big things. There's obviously a lot of subcategories in there, but hopefully that makes sense, Sarah.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Well, perfect. So we've walked through all the way from the key mistakes that are being made to starting from scratch and building it kind of block by block in the most effective way. If we've got a founder that's listening right now that wants to take that first actionable step, they want to leave this wherever they're listening to the podcast and go make the first move, what is the very first thing that you recommend somebody does to start building this properly?
Yeah, speak to your buyers, right? I spoke with someone the other day in Australia, and I asked him these questions. And I said, look, I asked him, how would you find this information out? Well, and he said, I don't know. So, really? I thought you looked after customers. Well, yes, I do. Well, could you not speak to those customers? Well, yeah, I can. Well, then maybe you do that, right? So speak to your buyers. There will be some customers that you have a great relationship with that you'll be able to have those discussions with them. You can ask them for that time and they'll be willing to give it to you. Then maybe someone else in your business. So that same company in Australia, I asked him, are there any others in your company that tend to have interviews with the buyers? Well, yes, the product person, the head of product. Well, would they, if that's part of their role, could you ask them to do so? And when they next do speak to a buyer, could you give them a few questions that you would like some answers to? Yes, I can. Good. So that's your next action. So it's not just you, there'll be others in your company that will have those relationships that you can ask. Now, here's the thing I will encourage. There are AI platforms out there that help salespeople identify the buyers who are ready to have a human-to-human interaction. And one of the important parts of the algorithm is yes, it's important to talk to buyers who like you, so closed won deals, but actually it's even more valuable to talk to those that didn't buy from you and learning from that. So what I would encourage the founders who are listening to this to do is speak with those that went through the buying journey with you, but didn't end up buying. Mm-hmm. Because finding out why is in some ways more valuable than finding out from those who did buy. So my first point is speak with your buyers. There's a bit before that, which is what do you want to know, right? So there's a bit before that. Figure out what the buyer's journey could look like. So have some kind of framework that's flexible, because it is going to change as you speak to those buyers and you start to learn more. But have some form of framework there, a loose one, and then start to ask your buyers, where are you learning about this? Who's educating you about this? What are you going through when you're thinking about this type of decision? How do you discuss those things, those options internally, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you're worried about when you're having those kind of discussions? Like, what do you hate about the buying journey, right? What do you hate about having to talk to stakeholders? What do you experience when you do so? The good, the bad, the ugly, all of that stuff. You're trying to get to know them as much as possible about their world. What are the trigger points for when you would think about a potential solution, right? Or a decision that you need to make that might lead to a solution, right? So, the first thing I would think about is get some framework in about buyer's journey, right? And then the second part is start speaking to your buyers in any way that you possibly can, and continue to do so. Get a clear picture about what they are telling you about their experience and what makes them go down the journey, or what makes them actually decide to distance themselves from that journey.
Perfect. Amazing. Incredibly insightful. Thank you so much. Perfect place to wrap it up. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, Moeed. Yeah, we've got some incredibly actionable things to take away for founders here, and I can't wait to see how people put it into practice. If people want to learn more from you, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Sarah. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so /Moeed Amin. You can also find me on, we have a YouTube channel where we upload quite a lot of videos from experts around the world. I'll be sharing some of my thoughts in more detail, plus some business acumen related things where we analyze companies and financials, which is hugely important for salespeople. So again, that's Proverbial Door. That's the channel name. And you can also find me on the Proverbial Door website, proverbialdoor.com. It needs updating, unfortunately. However, my channel, my engagement with my buyers is different. They don't always look at the website. But yeah, you can find more information about me and you can connect with me more there. I respond to every contact. I also respond to a lot of comments that I see in our podcast show and in our YouTube channel as well. So feel free to comment on there, and we will respond.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Moeed, again. And thank you to all of you for joining us for another episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast. Please, if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube so that you can be notified weekly when we have wonderful guests like Moeed joining us to share everything about business development, all of that. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll catch you again next time.